So, hello everyone. My name is Filip Gregor, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here at this summit, at the Creating Sustainable Companies Summit. I work at Frank Bold. Frank Bold is a purpose-driven organization, purpose-driven law firm to be precise, that has initiated the Purpose of the Corporation project. The project itself is actually an open platform for thought leaders and experts who are interested in long-term viability and sustainability of corporations, and precisely publicly listed corporations, let's say the most important elements of the contemporary economic system. Over the course of last 2 years, the project has organized something what we have called a Global Roundtable series on corporate governance. The aim of this series was to identify the appropriate structures for corporate governance that are fit for the challenges of the 21st century. The results of this exercise are presented in the report, which is here, and you can pick a copy. And you also have a PDF on the USB sticks that you have received. The conference pack also includes a printed version of the summaries of each chapters. The objective of this meeting, of this summit, is to look at these recommendations, look at these individual areas that have been identified through this global consultative process, and discuss which of them actually make sense, which of them actually can deliver on their promised objectives, and on which of them we can actually focus and collectively discuss how we can actually make them a reality, how we can support the companies that are pioneering the way and are employing these best practices, and what can we do at the policy level to create an environment in which such practices and behaviors are supported. In recent years, maybe just in the last 12 months, there has been a very positive development in the public debate, among policymakers, and generally. And that development concerned something what some called greening the finance, the other call it creating a sustainable capital markets union in Europe. And this focus on long-term and sustainable orientation of capital markets is extremely important. But there is one more thing that we tend to forget when we discuss corporate governance, and those are the entities themselves that are at the center of corporate governance, that is the corporations. We neglect the fact that the purpose of these corporations is not necessarily to maximize shareholder value, and certainly not in the short term. Their purpose is to be sustainable. Their purpose is to be viable. Their purpose is to live and thrive, and through their success, they can deliver value for their key stakeholders, including shareholders, but a range of other stakeholders as well. And corporate governance must be built with this perspective in the center, with the perspective that the corporation is really the key element in this sense, and not just a vehicle for creating shareholder value, or in the worst case, a trading article on capital markets. So that's it for me for the introduction. I hope it's clear what we are trying to achieve here. This is not necessarily an event where we want to present our great ideas. And by the way, those are actually not our ideas in that report. It's something what has been discussed in the numerous roundtables in multiple European countries and in the United States. We have just put it together and gave it some form and shape. And what we would really like to achieve today is a debate, a discussion, and reflection on how can we actually achieve these objectives and which of these identified best practices is the most appropriate. I also have to, and it is my pleasure to thank to all people who participated in this project, who contributed to this project. I would like to thank to Novo Nordisk that kindly supported financially organization of this particular event, and to 12 other organizations that have hosted those roundtables around Europe and in the United States. There were more than 260 thought leaders who took part in the consultations, and numerous other experts who contributed in other ways. I can't possibly name them all, so I will just leave it at that. And before we start the first panel, and please, I would like to ask panelists Susan Storm and Marcello Palazzi to join John Kay here at the table. But before we get to the panel and to the keynote that will be delivered by Mr. Kay, Richard Howitt, the long-standing champion of corporate responsibility and corporate governance and accountability, would like to welcome you to this event together with us. Richard has been a friend for a long time and supported this endeavor, and for which we are very grateful. Please, Richard.
Thanks very much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for asking me to open this conference. I'm really looking forward to it. Let's start by acknowledging a big truth, that whether it's because of the global financial crisis or the challenges of climate change, it has now become almost the received wisdom that chronic short-termism of business and of capital markets has to change. But it's equally true to say that it's very easy to say, but very much harder to do. So a lot of thought has begun to go into what are the true obstacles to making that happen. And this project, the Purpose of the Corporation project, of which this summit is the final part, has done just that. I would like to say, Filip, to you and all your colleagues at Frank Bold, I'd like to say to the Cass Business School Modern Corporation project, but also to the whole network that you've created around Europe and drawing on other regions in the world. I think it's been a fantastic project over 3 years, and today is a very special day where it comes to a conclusion and its final report is published. I remember right at the start of it, Page's predecessor, Chris Halberd, coming into my office and saying, you know, we want to change the notion about what is the purpose of a corporation. And I'm thinking like that. And then I went to one of the early meetings of the project, and I remember hearing one of the experts saying, the problem is that everyone thinks that shareholder primacy is a legal requirement, when actually it isn't, it's only a norm. And I found myself learning and challenging some of my own thinking in response to this project. But that's not a bad thing, because those of us who work in this field are saying to companies, you should change your mindset. And perhaps part of achieving that is some of us being willing to change our mindset too. But this is a debate that isn't just happening here, it's happening around the world. I had the honour to go to the World Economic Forum with the UN Principles on Responsible Investment and the UN Global Compact, and we led a debate about the shift towards long-termism. I've also been very influenced by the Sustainable Capital Markets Manifesto produced by Aviva Global Investors, who are also here today, and who show that mainstream investment community is embracing and indeed leading some of these arguments. And a number of major corporates have formed a new global organisation focusing capital on the long term, including the world's largest investor, BlackRock, whose chief executive wrote to the top 500 companies on the S&P index in the United States, calling on them to tackle short-termism and urging them to report on long-term strategy. And that makes today's report and discussion absolutely pertinent to this debate going on throughout the whole world. And quite simply, it is an issue of corporate governance and of rules which seek to protect shareholders, but which in reality have failed them and which continue to fail them. And it does open the question on how far the purpose of the corporation is to serve shareholders exclusively, and how far there should be accountability to other stakeholders in society. Not just value creation, but which values we are talking about, and perhaps the concept of shared value. In the European Parliament, we've been wrestling with these important questions about how we encourage and incentivise shareholder activism, investor engagement and stewardship in the context of the EU Shareholder Rights Directive, and how companies integrate ESG in their financial reporting through the EU's Non-Financial Reporting Directive, of which I'm deeply proud. The link between those two directives is important. The failure to address social, environmental and human rights impacts of companies in the past partly derives from a failure to understand that these can be just as material to the future of the company as the economic impacts contained in existing corporate reporting. In Europe, we've used the term non-financial reporting as the umbrella term, but actually what we should recognise is that the impacts have a very real financial cost indeed. Which brings us to corporate governance. Reporting is not an end in itself, nor done only for the purpose of external accountability. I've always said that at least half of the benefit of good reporting is within the company itself. But for that to be true, Boards and senior management have to see the relevance of the information, and to make a difference, it has to become part of corporate decision-making and business strategy. The term we've often used is that of mainstreaming. Now, in neither of the two EU directives that we've come up with are there perfect solutions, but I do think we've started to ask the right questions and that we've achieved a significant step forward. But your project rightly considered not just those, but a whole range of tools and mechanisms based on soft law as well as hard law, and of different models in different jurisdictions, and of leadership within the company itself. And as we have now become used to calling it, the smart mix. And of course, we are seeing further action here in Europe which can enhance the agenda. Please note the consultation started by DG Just in March this year on barriers to long-term and sustainable investment. And I very much welcome the significant announcement by European Commission President Juncker in his State of the Union speech to the European Parliament only earlier this month, and in the Capital Markets Union communication published to coincide with it, for the establishment of an expert group to develop a comprehensive European strategy on sustainable finance. Clearly, this is not just about a response here in Europe. In your project, I met benefit corporations from California for the first time, only one form of corporate structure, but one that demonstrates that company structures can be changed, but that the company can still at the same time be successful. And I think we all know in this room and outside it that long-termism is already rooted to a far greater extent inside the culture of many Asian countries, and hence in their business models too. Indeed, it may be that Europe is an inhibitor of some of the changes in practices that are required in global terms, rather than the leader that which we would all like it to be. And maybe we are in the right place to lift some of those obstacles. And I promise you that is not a British point. But it makes this gathering in Brussels and its pan-European composition all the more compelling. The project itself set itself the task of defining, I quote, a new comprehensive approach to corporate governance. But is this something that corporations themselves will actually want to embrace? I can tell you that I went to the 18th European Corporate Governance Conference in May in the Netherlands, which brings together company secretaries and other senior professionals from business across the continent, and who were talking about what they called a process of more alignment across the EU on building CSR into good corporate governance. Corporations are already asking some of the right questions, and I believe the results of this project that we're about to hear about throughout today indeed provide some of the answers to those questions. Now, I have to say today, very briefly, as my friends in the audience know, that this speech is one of my last duties as European Parliament Rapporteur on Corporate Social Responsibility before I step down from the European Parliament to have the honour of heading up the International Integrated Reporting Council. The 6 capitals of integrated reporting, intrinsic to IR, are at the very heart of the transition to long-term value creation, which is itself intrinsic to this project. There is a good section on integrated reporting on page 62 of the report published today, and the adoption of the IR framework is one of the key final recommendations of the report itself. I very much hope the ideas in the report will feed into a joint event that IIRC itself is holding with the International Corporate Governance Network in London in December, and I hope some of you will join me there. But I do want all of you to understand that I look forward to taking forward these ideas with you, not just now, but in the future, for me personally, in the long term, not the short term. One final point. In our discussions today, I want to invite you to comment not just on how this new corporate governance could operate, but also on the arguments that will mean companies, markets, standard setters and regulators will want to introduce these changes. We are talking about a paradigm change. And in a conference about purpose, we must have our own sense of purpose. I am sure the painstaking work of all of you, all the round tables, the new understanding, the fresh thinking, that it has created that sense of purpose. And I'm sure that sense will permeate throughout today's discussions. It is a deep pleasure to be here and to open this conference. Thank you very much indeed.